to an episode of the North Bench Wars podcast. My name is Joshua Northcutt, and joining me today is, as always, co-host Alex Perez and director Andy Edwards. As we mentioned on last show, the Benchwarmers podcast will now be all about interviews, and we have a special guest today. You've probably seen him, or heard his voice, I should say, over the radio, talking some NKU basketball, calling NKU basketball. He also writes for Xavier. Being a UC fan, you know, it's a little bit of a rivalry there, but joining us will be Rick Broering. Rick, thank you for joining us. Obviously reached out to you, and you were more than willing to come on.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm an NKU guy, so if you're from NKU, you're students of NKU, you reach out to me, there's a good chance I'm going to want to help. But the second part is, like, I like to try to support people that are doing things right. And, I mean, you had Dan Hort on this podcast, you had Austin Elmore on this podcast. Like, is Rick Broering going to tell you no after that? Like, come on, who am I? So, no, it's just like I'm a fan of the show. Like I told you, I listened to those episodes and thought they were great. So, really excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's obviously been really cool. We've been wanting to do a lot more interviews because obviously for demos and stuff like that, it comes beneficial. And I've been very surprised with how open that a lot of just people like you who have had a lot of success in this field are willing to help and almost like not mentor, but mentor the students coming up.
I appreciate you saying that. I do want to be very clear that there are levels to this. You know, like Dan Hort is like somewhere here in terms of success, like Austin Elmore somewhere there, and then like I'm a bit lower level. I appreciate you saying those things, though.
I don't see it that way, though. I mean, you have your hands in a lot of different sports, as we're going to talk about. I've seen you on Channel 12 or Channel 5. I always get that
12. I worked there for about 5 years.
Channel 12. You've been constantly on 1530 talking, obviously, Xavier basketball, and then your play-by-play, which me and Alex will bring up a little bit because it's what we want to do. We were the student broadcast team along with our buddy Soup this past year. So the levels are everything. I still would say you have a very successful career and something that me and Alex would gladly take in return if that's where our paths go.
Oh, that's very kind of you guys. Thank you. And again, thank you for having me on.
Of course.
Absolutely.
So first question, how did you get your start? Obviously, you've kind of had your hands in a little bit of everything, as I mentioned. Where did you get your start and how did it lead to where you are today?
It's all started right here at NKU. When I first came here, I was originally at Holy Cross High School in Covington, and I thought I was going to go play college baseball. For what reason? I have no idea. I threw like 70 miles an hour as a pitcher, right? And so I was going to go start a college baseball career with dreams of I don't know what. I didn't even like baseball that much. Like I was a basketball guy, and it was just like I was hanging on to wanting to play sports forever. And I was all lined up to go to Kentucky State, got down there, talked to them for hours on like an orientation visit, and at the last moment I was like, something isn't right about this, like what am I doing, like I'm not a baseball player, and chose to come back to NKU. And then my first year here at NKU as a freshman, actually I started doing the internet radio thing, became popular. It wasn't for NKU, but in high school sports around the area, people started having like team broadcasts and then doing some like game of the week type broadcasts. So I got involved in that type of stuff, and then it wasn't long before I realized the blog era was taking place online, and Twitter started maybe my sophomore year. So pretty quickly I was like, all right, I'm launching a Northern Kentucky high school sports blog and following that on Twitter, and build a little bit of a following there. And that's kind of where I started. It was called NKY Sports Blog, ran that through college. And then my very last year of college, I actually got the Xavier Rival site. At the time, as the network we were on, now it's 24/7. But I got that from Brian Snow. So it all kind of started while I was still here at NKU.
Yeah, my buddy is actually a big fan of your writing. His name is Michael Schwally, and all the time he brings you up because he loves your work covering Xavier. Getting that, how did it end up leading to the play-by-play or color commentary of NKU basketball?
You know, that's funny because I always wanted to do play-by-play growing up, and like since I was 11. The one thing I will say, I have two things that are at odds with each other that I think are both strengths of mine. One is I'm very self-aware, and the other is I have irrational confidence, right? So like at 11, I kind of realized like, man, I'm not playing in the NBA. Like it's just not going to happen. I'm looking at TV and I'm like, there's not short, fat white dudes in the NBA. So this just isn't going to happen. And my parents were very supportive, but like I still realized that was the case. And so at that point I was like, I need to be a broadcaster. And I don't know if you remember Home Alone, but the Talkboy tape recorder was big that Christmas year. So I got a Talkboy tape recorder, and that started my broadcast career, watching games on mute and calling them there myself. And then from then on, it was like, I'm going to be a play-by-play guy. And like I told you, I started this stuff with the blogging and got the Xavier job where I was actually like making a little bit of money. It wasn't a lot, but it was something at the time, especially coming out of college, where you're like, heck, you give me, I don't know, $800 a month, I can probably figure this thing out between a buddy sharing rent and some snacks, you know? So like, I was getting much more than that at the time. So I was like, I'm happy with this. I'm just going to stay doing this. And the idea of like doing the broadcaster thing, it was minor league baseball, travel all around, bounce all around. And I was never against that. I'd always thought like at some point I'll bounce around and I'll go to other cities. And the farther it got along of like, well, now I'm building a following in Cincinnati as like a college basketball or Xavier guy. And the whole like high school thing was going, and it kind of passed on a little bit, but I had built up a following there. And at some point I was just like, you know what, I'm not doing the broadcaster thing. Like I'm just not going to be play-by-play. That's fine. It is what it is. And then NKU went Division I in basketball, and I was a college basketball guy in town, and I was a huge NKU supporter and fan. I'd gone to every game. At the time, the games were on ICN 6 when I was in school here. So we did instead of the ESPN Plus broadcast, we were manning cameras for like local public access cable when the games were on there. So I was doing all that stuff while I was in school, then going to all the games after I had got out of school. So I was one of the few people in town that was doing some media stuff that like really knew what was going on with NKU basketball. So as soon as they made the switch to Division I started making that a thing. Like when I was on the air, I would talk about NKU basketball. And a guy named Tony Counts, who was the guy who hired me here at NKU, he worked for Learfield. He was the GM here of the NKU accounts. He had heard me, I think, on the radio talking about NKU, and he liked that. And he kind of got me implemented into the pregame part of the broadcast. And then the 1 year where I got hired, it was Darren Horn's first year here. They were, I think, 3 games into the season, and they had a change there where they were parting ways with their color guy, and they're like, hey, like, are you interested? And, you know, all along it was like the dream was play-by-play, and then somehow I backdoored my way into broadcasting as a color analyst, which, you know, I never played, never coached. So you talk about imposter syndrome. It was certainly a weird position for me to be in. Like, you look at the other guys in town who have that position. It's Byron Larkin, who's the all-time leading scorer at Xavier, and a guy like Terry Nelson. So it's a weird spot for me to be in, but super grateful, and I'm really appreciative of the opportunity.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I was going to bring up not being a player, or even coach. Like, how have you been able to adapt so well? Because it seems like you and your play-by-play guy have such great chemistry. Yeah, well, the on-air chemistry, I have to give all the credit in the world to Jim Kelch, because like what a position for me to be in, where it's like I'm coming in. I've never been a color analyst. I've done play-by-play, but like high school sports, man, low-level college stuff. Thomas More, I had done some stuff on the internet, but like I had never done Division I on the radio. I'm stepping in middle of the season. I'm dealing with a guy who's done Major League Baseball, you know, a real professional broadcaster who takes it very seriously. And it's a fun guy to be around off the air, but like when we're on the air, he is a professional and he is really good. And so that was a dream for me in terms of stepping in, because it was like, one, it felt like good pressure in the fact that I don't want to mess this up for him. Like, he's doing a real professional broadcast here, regardless of what I'm doing. So I better get on board and get it right quickly. But also because, man, the amount of questions and the amount of feedback, it wasn't like we showed up and just did a broadcast those first couple of years. Even now, it's like we do a broadcast. Sometimes in media timeouts, we're talking about like, hey, that got awkward there during that exchange. What happened? Like, what do you want me to do instead? Like, for instance, maybe something will happen where if he's blocked out from a play where a ref got in his way, it's like, how do you want me to handle that? I don't want to step in and call play-by-play, but what should I say in those situations, or something like that? So we've worked all those things out over the years, but we talk about it constantly. I mean, we have 5, 6, 7 hour drives sometimes in the car together, and during those times we always just sit there and we talk like,
what can we get better at? What types of things do we want to improve on? What didn't go well? What did go well? And even pregame interviews, we'll talk about a lot, like way more than anyone should ever talk about a pregame interview that only lasts 3 minutes. But part of that is because Jim Kelch is really good at what he does, and he takes it really seriously.
Yeah, as I mentioned, me and Alex were part of the student broadcast, and we worked a lot of games together. And as we started and then progressed, you could just tell the chemistry just builds on air. And like you mentioned, when the clock stops and we're not on air anymore, we're sitting there talking to each other. Okay, this is what we're going to come back to. But speaking of Alex, I know you got some questions?
Yeah, you and Jim do a special job as the voice of the Norse, and obviously calling radio is a lot different than calling TV. So what are the keys to like a good radio call?
Well, there's no question that the difference between radio and television are radio is a play-by-play guy's call. Like, that's his game. Television, it's all on the analyst, right? Like, the play-by-play guy should mostly get out of the way. He's there for the exciting moments to maybe add some atmosphere and get some administrative stuff done. But it's more on your analyst when you're on television. When you're on the radio, it should be probably 65, 75 play-by-play guy, in my opinion. So my role is to stay out of the way as much as possible. Don't step on Jim's toes while he's calling the action. And then whenever I feel like there's something where I can really add value, and that's something that when you start out, I think you feel like you need to talk every time there's dead air or every time there's an opportunity to talk. And the longer I've done this, the more I've tried to be like impactful when I talk. Like, do I have something interesting to say, or am I just going to say a cliche that you've heard 1,000 times on a broadcast? And if it's the latter, then sometimes a little bit of dead air and then it going back to Jim and him continuing with this play-by-play is easier on the listener. It doesn't have to be super choppy. So I think that's the biggest thing with color analysts on a radio broadcast is stay out of the play-by-play guy's way as much as possible and be as understated as you can. On television, a little bit different. It's more your show. On the radio, though, I think it's a much easier listen if you kind of let the play-by-play guy do his thing.
Gotcha. And then Josh mentioned that me and him both want to do play-by-play. So you mentioned recording yourself, but are there any other tips for somebody who's like wanting to get into this field?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way around it. Networking is so important. And I think just you guys even doing things like this, reaching out to people, picking their brain. But now you've also got contacts, right? Like, it's not just the fact that you did a podcast, but now if you reach back out to probably anyone that you've had on this show and you say, hey, thanks again for doing the podcast. By the way, I know you know such and such. I'm applying for a job with him. Would you mind putting in a good word? That's going to go a long way when you actually do try to apply for jobs. So there's no way around the fact that is probably the number one thing is network so you know people. And then you got to get lucky. Like, people will talk about being lucky, and I feel like I've had luck, but the luck comes with putting yourself out there and creating a surface area for luck. You know, doing as many things as possible, meeting as many people as possible. That creates those opportunities for luck and for someone to say, hey, you can do this, can't you? Or do you want to step in here and give this a try? And when you get those opportunities, like, you just got to know what to do with them, which is work as hard as you can.
For sure.
Moving on, we'll go ahead and ask you some questions about Xavier. I'll lead off with first, and then I'll throw it over to Andy because, again, he's a Xavier fan, so sure. He had like 10 of them, so we had to start cutting them down a little bit. But the first question, obviously, the big hire, Richard Pitino. Have you been able to sit down and talk to him or interview him at all since he was hired?
It's interesting you asked that. So we did talk the day he was introduced as the head coach at Xavier. There was a probably 20-minute period where me, Shelby Dermer from the Enquirer, Jason Williams from the Enquirer, and there were probably like Mike Petralia was there. I think that was it. There was probably those four people sat down and got the opportunity to talk to him for about 20 minutes and just a little bit of not off the record stuff, but things that may not get asked in a press conference setting. And then the next opportunity, we're recording this on Tuesday, first week here of June. This Saturday, I'm going to be doing a sit down live podcast at Dana Gardens with him.
Yes.
So,
as you can hear, Andy very excited about that.
Yeah.
I personally, again, like I said, I'm a UC fan, but I thought that was an absolute excellent hire by Xavier, and I'm very interested to see how he does, because what I didn't realize, and how young he was at Minnesota.
Yeah.
Being, I think it was like 31, coaching in a Power 5 conference, and nothing against Minnesota, but that's a hard job for basketball.
Yes.
Now he gets to come to a place that has all this winning success, a list of coaches. Obviously, his dad pushed for him to get here. I am very much looking forward to seeing how he does at Xavier and where I guess he can take them to the heights.
No, what you just said is kind of the exact thoughts I had, which was, wow, he's still so young. He has so much experience. When you look at the Minnesota years, you can look at that a lot of different ways. And certainly I think UC fans will spin it one way, Xavier fans will spin it a different way. But the thing that stands out to me, good or bad, is how young he was when it was all happening in a really, really difficult place to win. And oh, by the way, if you look at their best wins in recent history, their best years in recent history, they were under him.
Yep.
So I think that can be looked at in a positive way, really, his years at Minnesota, even though it ended with him getting fired and then getting rehired almost immediately there at New Mexico, and that went well. So Xavier's in an interesting spot in its current timeline as a program. The Big East is in an interesting spot with the current college sports landscape. Who knows how this is going to work? I'm not saying this is a slam dunk, surefire, he's going to be successful, but I think it is a really outside the box hire. It would have been very easy to say, let's go back to Chris Mack. A lot of people are going to be behind this, pat us on the back and say, great hire. They decided to do something else. And I think I applaud people for being bold and making bold decisions. And I think Greg Christopher and Colleen Hanich, the president at Xavier, decided to do that.
Right. Andy, I know he just answered one of your questions, kind of, but I'll throw it your way.
I mean, you kind of answered it, but not really, because, we talked about Chris Mack. He was, that was kind of one of the guys on the bubble. Like, is he going to come back? Are we going to stay in the family again? Because we had Sean Miller was in the family. We had Chris Mack was in the family. Were we going to come back to the family, or are we going to go outside the family? Is that a good decision? Are we making that great decision of going outside the family, bringing in a new coaching staff, bringing in a new brain kind of to Xavier?
Andy, I get the sense you don't like the decision.
No, I
want to hear your take on it.
I'm skeptical. I love this hire. I think it is great. I think he's done an amazing job. I'm just skeptical. Was Chris Mack the right hire over Pitino? Or is this going to be able, is he going to be able to live up to the Big East name? Live up to the Xavier name? We are a basketball school. That is the thing. We are the basketball school in the Big East. We don't have our football. We don't have anything like that. Is he going to be able to live up to that kind of competition?
I totally get where you're coming from. And I would say, Chris Mack, in my opinion, is the best college basketball coach in Xavier history. Yes. So I don't have any issues with people saying Chris Mack would have been a great hire. He was the guy that you should have brought back. But also, I'm curious to see how this is going to work out. And I just applaud. It's not so much that I think this is a great basketball decision. I just think it's an interesting and bold decision by Greg Christopher to say, I'm going to do something different in this pivotal time in Xavier history. And I think you can certainly push back on that. There are Xavier fans who did when it happened, but it's hard for me to do that because I like when people think that way typically.
Yeah, I also wanted to know, how do you think he, in the XU, how is he going to be able to compete in the Big East NIL market? Because, that's kind of a big thing now in basketball is the NIL deals. How is he, Pitino, going to be able to compete in the Big East when, he's got a father over there in New York that's kind of a big name in basketball? How is he going to be able to compete in that Big East?
Well, I mean, just ask if Mike Repole, his dad's big money booster at St. John's, can chip him off an extra few mil for the NIL deals. I don't see an issue.
There you go.
No, I think if you're talking about the NIL situation, I don't think that's all on Richard Pitino, first of all. That's going to be on Xavier donors, businesses in town. It's also going to be changing here, we think, if this house settlement deal goes through to where the schools are going to be able to pay directly and not just the NIL collectives. And once that happens, I know there are going to be loopholes. You're still going to be able to do NIL deals. It'll go through a third-party clearinghouse at that point. But I do think it will slow down. There's a difference between my company is doing a collective deal with that athlete, where he's putting my company's name on his shirt or whatever, and we're doing a deal with him, and we have to decide on a fair market value versus I'm just giving my buddy who's the head coach at X school $5 million to distribute as he sees fit, and we never have to really talk about it. Those are two different things. So I do think it does slow down the NIL spending for a lot of these schools, and the schools in the SEC and Big Ten that now have to wrestle over football money versus basketball money, they're going to be somewhat limited in some of those conferences where Xavier doesn't have to do that. So how will he compete in the Big East? I expect him to probably be still middle tierish. I mean, He's not going to be up there with St. John's. He's not going to be up there with UConn. And that's not because of him. I think that's because of where Xavier is in the NIL game. But I also think he's as marketable as any coach Xavier has had. I mean, from a national name, when he got hired, he was front page of ESPN for like 24 hours. The Xavier's head coach hire has never been front page of ESPN to my knowledge, I don't think. And that was even with Sean Miller coming back after the FBI scandal. I don't think it was that big of a deal to ESPN. Maybe that was because ESPN had screwed that story up. I'm not sure. But, it's really, I think, the NIL thing, it's a problem for everybody. I'm not saying anyone has a solution or it's going to work out for Xavier, but I also think for right now, the way things are currently trending, this is as optimistic as it's looked for the Big East and Xavier in the last 2 or 3 years.
Right. And then also, my take on it as well, I also agree with you. Middle tier, I feel like he is going to be probably in that. We're going to probably be in that with the Big East, not going to be up there with St. John's. Again, this is the first year. I mean, you got to give a coach time. I mean, first year, you got to give that coach time. Also, pretty young as a coach, not as experienced as some of the other coaches in this Big East. But, we got to give him some time to learn. I think he will be a great addition to this team. But yeah, Josh, I believe
he's young in age, but he's got a ton of experience.
Right.
Like, he has been coaching for a long time, and a ton of that was at the high major level in the Big Ten. So I think that's the one really exciting thing about him as a hire is he is still young in his tenure. He could still be at Xavier for a long time, theoretically, and he's already got a wealth of experiences, including some failures in there that he's learned from. And in theory, what he says and what Greg Christopher, the athletic director at Xavier, says is that he's a better coach because of those failures.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be key. It's just learning from those mistakes. Alex, you have a question or two?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but Xavier is returning 0% of their scoring from last season. So how do they continue to compete for a tournament berth despite that?
So that's $1 million question. I think if I could answer that definitively, I'd be on staff already, because they were looking for an assistant coach not too long ago. They filled it with Kareem Richardson, who had been here previously with Chris Mack. I think they have tried to piece together a roster that in their mind gives them a chance right away this year to I think compete in the Big East. I don't think anyone's going to be arguing that Xavier's a top-tier team, like top 3 or 4 in the Big East this year. I think the best-case scenarios, people are probably going to be picking them middle of the pack, and some other people are probably not going to be so kind and have them towards the back this year of the Big East. But going forward, I think they've tried to have some room for sustainability in the sense that they have a lot of freshmen that are rising sophomores that just committed in the transfer portal. So I think the hope is you develop these guys for a year, hopefully they blossom, they get to learn what the Big East is about, and then you have a better chance of retaining them the following year through NIL. Some of them might even be on multi-year deals now. There have been some of those implemented where you can't necessarily restrict them and guarantee they'll be back for 2 years, but you can structure the money payouts. So if you stay on past that sort of second year cutoff point, you get a lot more of the money, a lot more of the payout. So I think you're seeing some schools get creative with those types of things to keep guys in place longer. And that's what Xavier's going for over the next few years, in my opinion.
And then with the new coach, do you think this is the best time to bring him in, or would it be like with returning players, or do you think a whole new team is a more ideal situation for him to come into?
I mean, ideally, you'd have experienced, talented players coming back, I think. But there is something to be said for if you're trying to implement a new style of play, a new mindset. Some of it's going to be similar to what Sean Miller just did. Sean Miller wanted to play up-tempo on offense especially. That's what Richard Pitino is going to do. So some of that's not going to change. Like Roddy Anderson, who actually was on the team last year, he redshirted, didn't play at all, but he was in the system last year learning and practicing with them constantly. He's going to get a lot of benefit out of playing that up-tempo system last year with Sean Miller because that's a lot of what Richard Pitino is going to do now. So ideally, you would have some guys that already had some experience at Xavier and in the Big East, but I don't think they mind necessarily being able to sort of start fresh, start with all guys who are kind of like coming in together, learning together, and there's not necessarily a pecking order, so to speak.
Josh?
Yeah, and then you mentioned, obviously, or we all talked about the turnaround. What do you think is going to be the strength of this team, though, with what they've brought in outside maybe just a coaching experience?
I think they are much longer and more athletic in the front court. That's one thing that it's clearly been an identity thing that they've tried to establish is their big men are going to be rim runners, transition, athletic, pick and roll dunkers, and shot blockers. They're not throw it into them in the post and let them go to work on the block like they're Zach Freemantle. You know, it's going to be completely different in that regard at the center position. So I think that's probably the most notable thing, and in theory, it's a strength for them, hopefully, that they have some rim protection and some more athleticism in the front court. They also have a couple of guys that still need to prove themselves. When you're talking about Anthony Robinson, who transferred over from Virginia, wasn't much of an offensive presence at all, didn't play a ton of minutes last year off the bench for Virginia, but definitely had some athleticism and good size at 6'10", 250-ish, and very long and athletic. And then Pop Njai, who's coming over from UNLV, a 7-footer, rim protector, had really good shot blocking numbers in a limited role. We'll see what it looks like in a more expanded role at Xavier.
And then moving on to NKU, obviously, as we want to go to school there, and find it a little bit more important to all of us. You obviously get to work with Coach Horn a lot. Do you have any fun stories you can tell us about Coach Horn and you?
Yes. Let me see. Let me think about what I can tell on air. Nothing too crazy, but gosh, I should have come with one prepared. I'm struggling off the top of my head to think of anything.
The only reason I ask is because when he's coaching, he's serious business, and you just see that serious side. So I didn't know if there was any like off-air story or fun, because like I said, obviously you work with him on the Darren Horn Show. Yeah,
he is very sharp and quick-witted. So the thing about Coach Horn is you don't want to get into like a back and forth or a battle of the wits with him unless you feel like you're ready to go and you're prepared and you've got some one-liners, because like he will undress you pretty quick with his wit. So that's the biggest thing. I remember my first year doing games. Jim had already had the thing of Norse Nuggets, where it's like a little pregame hit on social media that he puts out. It's just a video of us talking. And we were at UNC Greensboro, where Wes Miller was the head coach before he came over to UC. And we were playing there. NKU was playing there, a game there. We were doing Norse Nuggets at shoot around before the game. And Coach Horn comes in and like photo bombs us and like pops in right between. And at this point, I barely knew him. It was like my third or fourth game probably calling for NKU at that point. So I was kind of like, oh, not necessarily what I was expecting from this guy. He's definitely got a playful side. And then, yeah, ever since then, it's just been like, I mean, very funny, very quick-witted. You see him on the court, as you said, very serious and very competitive, but he's also really funny in practices with his players and off the court as well.
And then, obviously, we talked about the NIL side of Xavier. At NKU, you brought it up in your last show with Coach Horn. And the NIL deal and the turnover hit NKU pretty hard this off season. However, it seems like a culture has been built by Coach Horn that players still want to stay here. What do you think makes maybe NKU different that wants to keep players here?
To this point, it has been a lot of the fact that they develop their players, and I think there's a track record there. Like, guys see the ones before them. If I'm a young forward, if I'm LJ Wells, I saw what Trey Robinson looked like when I first got to campus, and I saw what he looked like last year. You know, if I'm any of these other younger guys who got to see the ones come before me, the Jalen Tates, the whether it be a Drew McDonald before this staff even got here, or even since then, it's just been a nice trajectory going straight forward. That like it's been championships, it's been player development. These guys have had the ones before them lead the way and teach them and pass down that tradition. And I think that's what the guys have been playing for. Is it's like, we want to run the conference. We want to get back to Indianapolis for the semifinals of the conference tournament and hopefully the championship of the conference tournament and be competing for that every year. And that's how I think it kind of started, was with all those guys. Like it started right when they got here. They won it this first year with the new staff, and that just kept getting passed down through the player development and the success that they had in the postseason. And that's what it's been about for the most part. I think that's kept these guys here. Now you're in an interesting spot because you finally hit a point where enough of them graduated and there were a few other guys left that just maybe it was time. You know, the things weren't working out perfectly. You kind of had to get into this flow too. You don't want to be left behind trying to hang on to something when the whole sport has shifted either. And I think they've done a good job of pivoting and modernizing their approach and being like, okay, we still want to be about player development, getting our guys better, but we also have to blend in these one-year guys and the best roster we can make on a year-to-year basis. And so I think we're going to get much more of a glimpse of what that looks like this season, where you have to replace a bulk of your roster and the most important pieces of your roster for the most part. Although, I mean, bringing back Dan Goretzka and LJ Wells, there aren't a lot of teams in the mid-major level that can say that.
For sure.
So that's pretty exciting for NKU fans.
Definitely have to agree with that. And I know Alex has some questions about the team itself. So, Alex?
Absolutely. You talked about the roster, and you all did on the Darren Horn show as well. Kind of led me right into my question, actually. Which of the returners do you see making the next leap that they need to in order to be a high-impact player on this team?
I'd love to say Dan Goretzka because I'm really excited about what he's going to be. I think he could be player of the year in the conference potentially. But in terms of stepping up, I feel like LJ Wells' jump might be more noticeable just because I don't think we've seen, at least not for a full season or an extended stretch, what LJ Wells is capable of. We've seen flashes of it. We've seen some pretty good stretches, like towards the end of last year, he had a good stretch there that helped carry the team. But LJ Wells is a guy that I think can be a double-double type of presence in your lineup. I mean, he's a real physical rebounder with some athleticism, and he has skill all the way out to the perimeter. I don't think he needs to rely on the perimeter game. I think he needs to be inside more often than not. But he can do those types of things, and when you have that type of ability at this level with his size, his strength, his athleticism, I think there's still some untapped potential that we've yet to see from LJ Wells that we could get a taste of this year because they're going to be relying on him. He's going to have that opportunity. It's no more like, okay, we're not quite getting that from LJ. Let's throw so-and-so out there. Now, the one thing we've also learned about this coaching staff and Coach Horn is he's never afraid to do that. Doesn't matter who you are. He'll sit you if you're not getting the job done. So I'm not saying LJ's immune from being sat on the bench, but he's definitely going to get more of an opportunity to be the guy in the front court for this team than he ever has at any point in his career.
And then looking towards the new guys, is there one that you have your eye on to make an immediate impact or at least the most lasting impact coming this season?
Yeah, I think the new point guard from Australia, they seem really excited about him. And just watching the tape of him, the maturity that he has, it's a little bit different. You heard on the podcast that he's already graduated. He's been playing, I guess, sort of professionally over there for a few years. So he's a guy that has done some things. He's been around. He's got some experience. He's a little bit older. He's not your typical freshman coming in or anything like that. That's a guy that I think could be one to watch out for. The other that I'm really excited about that I think has the opportunity to step in, start right away, and you're going to need him to make a big impact because he's likely going to be trying to replace Trey Robinson, and that's Cale Robinson, the forward that they've added, 6'7", kind of a similar mold to Trey Robinson, like inside-outside skills, some athleticism to go with it. So those are the two guys that I probably have my eye on the most.
And then this past season, NKU had their worst finish in the Darren Horn era. Do you chalk that up more to the Horizon League getting better or them not playing up to that gold standard that you talked about?
I think it's probably a combination of both. I think when you talk about like the league getting better, what you've also seen is the impact of NIL and the transfer portal in the league. Like Robert Morris had money to spend, and they have money going forward to spend. They've made a commitment there, and same thing with teams like Youngstown State and some of the others that have had more success in recent years. They've been a little bit ahead of the game in terms of spending money on their rosters, and I think some of the other teams in the mid-major level and specifically in the Horizon League are trying to play catch-up with those teams, and I think that's part of what you saw with NKU last year. Now, I think there are also some things like Sam Vinson. trying to come back from his injury. Obviously not an ideal situation for NKU. You'd love to have a fully ready to go, fully healthy Sam Vincent. I think he would tell you there was a portion of that season where he wasn't quite himself yet. He wasn't back to the standard that he's used to playing at. And there were just some things, Dan Goretzka taking as long as he did to kind of get in the flow and figure it out at the point guard position. There were some things that just didn't quite click for that team, at least in time, for them to fully get on the same page. And it wasn't the year that they would have expected, but I think they just missed out. It was like they got hot at the end of the last season, like they have in the previous years, and I started to think, oh, this is going to be just like it's been for them, and they didn't quite have enough magic in them last year.
Josh?
Yeah. I think that's the best way to describe it. I was at that disappointing end to the season, obviously, and we talked about a little bit on air about how like NKU fans have now held this team to a higher standard. I guess it will be interesting to see what happens, like you mentioned, with the NIL and how things are changing. But I'm going to turn things real quickly back to the personal stuff side of things. You've done a lot interviews and stuff like that. Do you have a favorite interview that you have done, or one that sticks out to your mind that it was like kind of a starstruck maybe?
Oh, wow, that's a good question too.
Apparently, I'm stumping you.
Yeah. Well, I didn't think about these those questions off the top of my head. Then those are ones where it's like you start getting reflective. You start trying. You don't want to forget people,
Of course.
And I'm sure there's one where it's going to be like I'm going to get done with this, and someone's going to go, "What about such and such that you did?" Let me tell you this one that it's not a one-on-one interview, but I think it's one of the funnier stories of my career, and can tell you how this job can go. I was working for the Enquirer at the time. I was covering high school sports for the Enquirer, and they needed me to fill in on the Bengals beat. So I go to Bengals practice. I'm all excited. I'm Johnny Reporter there with the big dogs and Marvin Lewis. We're going to talk to him. And they had just done the Oklahoma drill. It was first day of pads, just on the Oklahoma drill. So I'm all excited. This is going to be a great story that I'm writing up. Probably a little sidebar for the Enquirer. You're going to see it. I get my opportunity to ask Marvin a question. So, Coach, anything you see out there in the Oklahoma drill today that you liked, that stood out to you? Not that I'm going to tell you. That was his response. Not that I'm going to tell you. And that was it. I was done. I was like, I don't know about the Bengals beat. No, I'm just kidding. That was really the first interaction with Marvin Lewis that I had, though. And it was like a welcome to this is what it's actually like dealing with these guys type of moment.
It hit you with the Bill Belichick. It's on Cincinnati. And he was just like, no, I saw everything I needed to see, but you ain't going to find out anything to let other teams know.
I believe that was the Hard Knocks year, too. So HBO was around. So I'm like, oh, good, this is going to be on TV now.
Oh, that is fantastic. And then also, you're in the podcast. Is there anything you don't do in the sports media world?
We were talking about the luck thing before, and that's the way I always view it, is it's like I'm probably going to lose some of these jobs at some point. Like someone's going to figure out that I'm not qualified to be doing the same job as Byron Larkin, even if it's for NKU. And, I need to have some other balls up in the air. So hopefully if a couple of them fall, I'm still juggling a couple, and that's the way I've always tried to look at it. But I love the podcasting format. It's just for me, it's something I think I'll always do, whether it's a real job or not, just because it's my favorite medium to listen to personally. And I think from a creative standpoint, I like doing it because you can be expressive. You can talk about whatever you want. You can do it in any niche you want. And whether it's 75 people listening or it's 75,000 people listening, it's like we get so caught up in social media numbers. But I do some social media work for some clients, and I was telling one today, it's like, if I told you, you're mad because only 1,000 people saw what you did. But if I told you today you were going down to Madison Theater and there's going to be 1,000 people sitting in the theater that you got to get up and talk in front of, you'd think that's the most important thing you're doing this month, without question. So it's it's easy to get lost in that. And that's what's fun about the podcasting thing is even if it's only 70 people listening, they're locked in on your podcast. Man, if they're going to sit there for 43 minutes with you or an hour with you, they really care about what you're saying and they're going to interact with you. And that makes it a really fun format.
Yeah. I do enjoy Skinny as well. So you getting to work with him, I bet that's enjoyable and fun.
He is the best. Now he has the best ability I've ever seen. It's an absolute superpower that I don't have that you've seen on this show already. When you've asked me for these stories to reflect on, recite, I'm like, I don't know. Let me think about it. When I ask Skinny, we have a segment called Ask Skinny Anything at the end of our podcast. And people will be like, tell me about a time Skinny embarrassed his entire family on vacation or something like that. And if I ask that, he's got a story immediately. Like, tell me a time Skinny got in a fight at a bar. He's immediately got a story. Like anything someone asks, it might be from 1973. Skinny has a story right off the top of his head, ready to go, and they're always funny. That is a superpower, and to also be so vulnerable. I mean, this is a guy who's had the #1 sports radio talk show in town. He's been a sports anchor on the #1 sports cast in town. And like last week, we were talking about farting on airplanes together. So like that's the ability to be vulnerable and just talk about whatever is a superpower too. And he's got that, unlike anyone I've ever met.
Andy, I'm going to ask one more time before we start wrapping things up. Do you have any more Xavier questions you'd like to ask?
I am all good. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate
Do you have any questions?
I'm good.
All right. Well, Rick, thank you again for joining. And if you can remember all the things that you do and where people can find your work, feel free to let them know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'm trying to get back into that I want to promote is Facebook. I'm a big Facebook guy now. I'm going big on Facebook. It's like cryptocurrency. No one's in on Facebook right now. I think it's going to skyrocket over the next 10 years. So what was in when I was first getting into college is now in again. Let's go back to Facebook. Find me on there. Look up the Rick Broering media page on there, and all my stuff I'll share there.
Well, I guess I got lucky because that's exactly how I messaged him when I saw him like the post. So again, Rick, thank you so much for joining us. This was an excellent conversation, and I know you say you're not up here with the tears, but this interview is by far one of my favorites that we have done. So thank you so much. As always, Alex, thank you. Andy, I guess thank you for being over there in the director's chair. And
of course,
as always, you can find us now on the CX Podcast Network. This will also now be available on Apple Podcast and Spotify, thanks to RSS. And until next time, peace.